Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by and welcome to part 4 of the end of season updates. I was just sort of going over part 3 before I posted it, and I'm doing it again. The idea was to keep the clips short so that there wouldn't be too many end of season videos, but I'm starting to waffle on some of the plants again, so I'll try and break it up in part 4, you know, so that you do get some short clips as well as some longer ones. I mean, they're filmed now. I have now completed the filming. It's all done. All the clips are sat there. It's just a matter of mix and match, get the videos going, and try and get some different videos in between them so that they're not just one after the other. But if I get fed up with doing that, you might get 2 in one day. I'll see how it goes. Right, these are my 2 Rhynchostylis giganteas, and one of them has a spike. Now I've just had to tuck the spike onto that tag because it was actually growing into the side of the basket, which probably wouldn't have done it a lot of good. First time bloomer. The other one that's in there hasn't bloomed yet, even though it looks the better and bigger plant. These plants just never look good. They always look tatty to me. But basically I took them out of bark media because they were staying too wet too long, and now I've got the opposite effect. They're bare rooted in a wooden basket, and I keep forgetting to dunk them in the bucket. So they're probably getting less moisture than they need now. Strictly speaking, these ought to be dunked every day, and I need to get back into that habit, and to do that I need to hang it in a place where I can get at it, which is not where it lives at the moment. But anyway, a first time bloomer. I'll be very interested to see what that looks like because I haven't had any before. Yeah, coming on. Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to get or how many buds it'll have, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, first time bloomer is always a pleasure. Why the hell this plant is still in my collection, I don't know. This is Dendrobium Stardust Firebird, or it was once, and all it would do is produce a mass of kikis with a bloom now and again. It did not justify its keep. So in desperation I took some kikis off and planted them. And my ruling for this one is, if you don't push up new growth from the base, see, the latest thing it's done is push a kiki out off an old cane. If it doesn't start growing from the base, it's just going to go. So another little group. It's amazing as I'm going round how many plants haven't actually got tags. But they're ones that I can't forget the names, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Doesn't always happen like that. Right, these were the 2 pieces that came off of the badly deteriorating Brassia that I had, and that's unusual. Brassias are vigorous growers, but this is Brassia tessa, 2 pieces, single bulbs, a long way from blooming, but both of them are rooting, so you know they're on the mend. They will make it, no doubt about that. This is Odontoglossum Rawdon Jester. I think it's a primary hybrid, but again it's a rescue piece, and it's another one of these. I mean, I've just watered this because all of the new roots are at the top of the pot, which was bone dry, and the bottom of the pot was absolutely soggy, so the air cone's not working. So it's another one that needs the tray removed, get some air around the base of the plant. And this is the 3rd one. Whether you catch the drift of this or not, I bought a Zygopetalum in an auction that was in a box of 3, yeah, and this was one of the ones that were in the box. It was in a bit of a sorry state, but it did have a new growth which has now pushed on well and is just pushing out its new roots. Now believe it or not, last time I watered was from today 8 days ago, and that one got missed because it was still wet. And it's still wet, and the reason is it's got very, very few roots, and there's some moss in the pot, and it's been sat in a tray. So it's another one. That one is it's Peggy Ruth Carpenter Morning Joy, and it's Odontoglossum, I think, something like that anyway. But it's not a plant I particularly wanted, but it does have spectacular blooms if it gets that far. So in a state of recovery but coming on. That's convenient that that plant came out next. This is Bialara Joe's drum, and this was a present. This came from Isabel. I bought some plants from a nursery, hand-picked, and this one arrived in the box. And the blooms on Joe's drum are almost identical to Peggy Ruth Carpenter, but Isabel didn't think she was growing this very well and that I should have a go. So have a go I will. Not the best of root systems yet, but the fact that it's got 2 new growths coming, it will produce a new root system. And it looks like it's going to be one of those where the roots come out as the bulbs get to maturity. So, I'm keeping my eye on it. The way to tell when you've got new growth, especially if you've had some concertina leaves, is to just look at the latest leaf. That's the one you need to watch, because that's the one that's going to grow. So you can tell. Unfortunately, I haven't been keeping that close an eye on this one, so I don't know whether these new growths have actually pushed on since I got it or not. But the plant's going to make it, there's no doubt about that. And if either of those 2 new growths bloom, it'll be a bonus. It depends on the root system they put out. If they can support a spike, I'm sure they'll try. Oh, now the sun's coming out. Haven't stopped the wind howling though. And this little group live in a huddle. A little collective. I cannot fail to be impressed with this plant. I mean, this is my only Antelope-type Dendrobium, and boy is that going to be something else if and when that blooms. It's called Black Antelope. Now I can't remember whether the blooms are the deepest red or the deepest purple, but they are almost black and quite large. Whether they're fragrant or not, we'll have to wait and see. But these 2 canes here were heading upwards to maturity when I got the plant, and these 2 were new growths. That's effectively not even a complete season's growth, those 2 canes, and they're still growing. They still haven't got to their terminal leaf. So I can't fail to be impressed with that plant. What a stunner. Now this is a little Latouria, this is Alexandriae, Rayi, whichever you like, non-bloomer so far. Again, I'm really waiting on new growths on this one. You know, the latest 2 growths are a good size, but I don't know whether they're going to bloom or not. Nearly all the Latouria types have a sign of a spike at their apex, but they, you know, sometimes they just don't mature and actually form a spike. This one, however, this has grown very, very well, and this is a primary cross. This is Polysema, excuse the noise again, crossed with Aberrans. Lovely new growths, always have a purple tinge on the new growths, I love it. And good roots pushing out from the growth that I've produced, which is about 4 or 5 I think, and we have a spike. So first time bloomer. Now that's an older cane, so in theory it is flowering size. If it blooms off the older canes and I've got 4 or 5 new ones, then next time it gets round to blooming, hopefully we'll get multiple spikes. It is possible to get multiple spikes on the same cane with these, but yeah, first time bloomer. It'd be interesting to see what those are like. Very interesting. Now this is Shelob Tolkien, and quite honestly I can't fault this plant. It has stunning blooms, it's a very vigorous grower, or it is for me, and it blooms on every single new growth. That's a bit of a biggie, but yeah, for what it produces, I'm happy with that. It bloomed on every single new growth that it put up this year, and there were quite a few. It's bloomed in 2 bursts basically, well pleased, and the growths that matured and bloomed are now pushing up the next set of new growths. Now unfortunately they will have to mature through the winter, but yeah, good new growths coming out. So that's the next set of blooms. A little bit of a way off, but you know, this has been in bloom a lot this year. Spectacular plant. Just couldn't be more pleased. I recommend everybody having this if they've got room for it and can get hold of it, of course. It's a vigorous grower. It just seems to go on and on. As I said, so far it's spiked on every single new growth without fail. doing well. Just while I'm there, this has a pot full of roots and many active green roots growing. This plant dries quite fast, so this one can stay in its tray. I don't want the bottom of the pot to dry out fast. So my trays are now becoming a tool. But I mean, you can see it's an absolute pot full of roots. That just is not going to stay wet long. Now it's okay if it totally dries in between watering, but not for long. You know, certainly no more than a day, 2 at the most. You know, it's in active growth. It needs its moisture. So that one can stay in the tray and hold the moisture in the pot for longer. Get those roots going, get those new growths going. Well, this is Dendrobium wedding bells. It's classed as a nobile, but I think it's got a fair bit of non-nobile in it. Just looking at the way it grows. Although it has the patterns, the canes are not quite nobly like. But it's grown a lot of new growths this year, all of which are still growing. Yeah, there's no terminal leaves on the latest canes, so it's still at it. So they're going to get even bigger. Beautiful delicate yellow blooms on this one, and a late bloomer. For a nobile, this blooms late spring, early summer. Last year it put on a really good show. Lots of new growths. It should do the same next year. I see no reason why not. Now these two have a little story. This was mounted and wasn't doing very well, so I potted it. Since then it's doing worse. However, this one was in a small pot and I mounted it. Now why I did them that way round I don't know, but this one's pulled on nicely. It's got some nice new growths on it. That's a nice little plant. Dendrobium moniliform variegata. There's the lovely pale edges. So that plant is doing well, and the fact that it is, I don't think that one's long for this world. I think what I might do with this one is take the rest of the kikis off. Several of them have gone off on a trip. But this part of the plant has, yeah, I can actually see it's actually got scale. Well, that's a dead one. As I say, everything was sprayed not that long ago. But, you know, when you're using a systemic, whether it can actually do any good on canes or not, I really don't know, especially with scale that have got the hard shells formed. So it might be that they survive. But, yeah, given that that's a good plant, and that isn't, I think I'll take the kikis off and dump the plant. It's just not worth having 2 of the same when you've got a good one and a bad one. So, yeah, decision made, I think. Well, these are my 2 Neofinetia falcatas, which are now called Vanders, but not in my book, they're not. They're both named varieties with big long Japanese words that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. Higashidi-maya, something like that anyway. The actual variety doesn't worry me that much. What does worry me is, that's the other one, that's Fukujimaru, something like that. But what does worry me about these is these have missed 2 watering runs. So these now haven't been watered for a month. And quite honestly, they are only just drying out. Now, the roots aren't dead. I was worried that I'd lost the roots when I repotted them into moss. The roots aren't dead. But they're not using the water, and they don't seem to be growing much since they were repotted. Maybe I've just got to patiently wait. See, that one is drying off, but there are green roots down in there. Anyway, they'll get a dribble of water this time round because they are getting quite dry now. But the tiniest amount of water that hopefully will wick into all parts of that moss. I don't want plants staying wet for a month, especially as we go into winter. So, yeah, just a trickle. They haven't bloomed for a while either. So hopefully this one's never bloomed. This one's bloomed a couple of times since I had it. But yeah, since I took them off the mounts, it's a bit of a culture shock to go from a mount with hardly any moss and a lot of bare roots into moss. But this is how they traditionally are grown. So I wanted to get them growing in the way that is the tradition for for Neos. So we'll see if they progress, but they haven't grown much this year. This one has put up a couple of new fans. This one hasn't done much. Now this is my Dendrobium Victoria Reginae. Non-bloomer so far, but bought as a pot full of kiki, so I wasn't expecting the earth anyway. These are the two latest canes, and it's leaning against the glass because it won't stand up. It's just one of those that I'm just going to have to pull these canes upright. But this cane here has nubbins. Now it did produce a kiki, which I've taken off. These canes have no nubbins as yet, so all I've got to do is just wait, you know, and be patient. Bought as kikis, you can't expect the earth, you know, that quickly. But this has signs that it may bloom. They may come to nothing, they may produce kikis. We'll have to wait and see. But this is not a warm grower, so I think it's coming into a period where it will feel more comfortable because it's cooler. Continuous grower though, so you know, it mustn't dry out for any length of time, although in the winter I will let it dry off. But yeah, we'll see if those actually produce buds. This is another group of sort of Oncidium alliance-y type things that are all in a state of rescue to one degree or another. This is not happy. It's a Brassia mivida. Lovely blooms if I ever see them again, but it's another one of those where the plant was just failing for no real reason. So I mean, I treated it in case it was the dreaded, and since then it pushed out a new growth that is far from perfect, but that new growth's been a long time growing, and I've just come to a conclusion. I started using my MSU fertilizer at the beginning of the growing season this year, and all through the winter I was feeding with a very, very, very weak seaweedy type stuff. And obviously some plants were actively growing, and I think that they just had weak growths as a consequence. That stuff had virtually no nitrogen in it, and if you've got active new growths, there's things they need that are just not in that sort of feed, especially using it at such low levels. So I think a lot of this is my own flipping fault. Actually, if you think about it, most things are your own fault. It's just whether you know or not. So that's the difference. All four of these pots are suffering from the dreaded dry at the top where the new roots are and soggy at the bottom. So none of these are going to get their tray. I mean, there's some good new roots coming out of that growth now. Hopefully the next growth will be stronger. I won't say that's a weak growth, but the leaves aren't good. And those leaves have been there a long time. This is a very, very slow growth, and for something that's got a good bit of Brassia in it, that's far too slow. So it needs to get a move on. This one is another one of my Wildcats, Rhynchostylis Wildcat Bobcat. And again, I like the bloom so much, I let it bloom when I shouldn't have done. A recovering plant is much better off recovering to recovered before you let the flipping thing bloom. But I couldn't resist, so I let this bulb bloom. We do have a new growth. We have signs of new roots. So, yeah, I may well not let that next one bloom if it decides to. Get some strength back into that one. These two were pieces off a massive plant. That's another one of those that just failed for no apparent reason, although I think in this particular case it was the dreaded F, because I know where it came from, so highly suspect. But again, treated. Anything that was suspect got treated. Part of the plant removed. I left two bulbs on this piece and what was a new growth at the time, which is sort of matured but not as big as it should be, and now it has a hell of a strong new growth pushing out, with good leaves and good new roots. This was the larger part. I actually left 3 back bulbs on this one, and what was the new growth has pushed on. Not as big as the previous bulbs, but you know, the latest growth again pushing out good leaves and good new roots. So they're both on the, oh, the sun's come out. They're both on the mend. They're both recovering, and I can't wait to see blooms on these. They are stunning. It's an Alicera, and it's Sunday Best Pink Skirt, an awarded plant. If I get this to bloom again, we'll all be impressed. Now this is a Maxillaria, it's Picta, and this is a non-bloomer, but then it was bought as a very young plant with just a couple of bulbs. So it's progressed, it has pushed up some new bulbs this year, and we'll see what it does. But I think it pushed up 4 new growths this year. If it pushes up more than that next year, it's going to start climbing out the pot. So we'll have to think about possibly moving it into a larger, probably flatter pot. But there are new roots pushing out in places. This is another pot that just will not dry out fast enough. So again, take the tray off, let the air cone do its job. Thank you for whoever suggested that. I mean, I'm sure this is going to do my plants the world of good, especially now we're coming into winter with the cooler temperatures and shorter days. It's going to be even more difficult to dry out pots. You know, we'll be getting to the trickle water soon, where they just get a little trickle round the top. That's where most of the new roots are, and the water will filter down. They don't need a lot of water in our short days. Now this beastie has a story. This is a Banfieldara Gilded Tower Mystic Maze. Couldn't get much longer a name, could you? This is my one plant that I know has had spider mites. Yeah, it was towards the end of last winter. It was lurking up the back on its own, and at the time it hadn't been repotted, so it was staying wet quite a while. It just got forgot, just didn't get looked at. But this is the damage. It's horrible. Now that's old damage, but that's just basically all of the surface of the leaf just eaten to pieces. So that's the damage you get. And like I said, if you've got spider mites, this is where they live in the main, on the underside of the leaves. These are the parts that get hit. Yeah? Unfortunately, this had a bad enough infestation, they even got on the top of the leaves, or the damage has eaten its way through. But those are the oldest 2 leaves, they don't matter. Yeah? That's the 2 they hit hardest. The others had some slight damage on them, but not much. They didn't do too bad. But what we have got now is 2 lovely strong new growths. Yeah? And a hell of a pot full of roots, of both roots and algae. But it's not coming out of the pot at the moment. I don't want to disturb it. I'm still pretty confident that algae does nothing more than use up your nutrients quicker than you would perhaps want. So it steals some from the pot. It's always around the outside of the pot. It's never in the middle of the pot. Not all the roots are around the outside of the pot. Now, if the roots are badly coated, yeah, they might not get as much of the nutrients as they perhaps need. But when the pot's full of nutrients, they're going to get enough. So I'm beginning not to worry about algae. It looks horrible. And next time it's repotted, it'll all get cleaned off. But yeah, it's another one. Pot full of roots, and incredibly difficult to tell if it needs watering because of the algae. That's the real bummer of a downside. And this one is the weight of the pot. Unfortunately, with the size of this couple of older pack bulbs, it's difficult to tell with the weight of the pot, because the pot's heavy even when it's dry. So it's a judgment call. It got missed out on the last watering because it was quite wet. So this time it has been watered, and it won't go back in its tray. Yeah, so that way it'll dry off. And quite honestly, that's one of the ways to kill algae, is let it go bone dry. It doesn't like it. Anyway, coming on, 2 good new growths on that. Be nice to see that one bloom again. I thought I'd just show this because the only reason I've had trays on my pots is so that when I've watered them, I can put them back on their shelf pretty quickly, and they don't drip on plants below. I mean, in the winter time, that could go straight in the crown of a plant, or, you know, down the neck of a leaf joint, and not do it any good. So that's the reason the trays have always been there, but they've been blocking the airflow. But what I've done now is one of the spare grills, I've just let it on there so that after the plants have been watered, they can sit there for 10-15 minutes until they've totally finished dripping. then they can go back on their shelf without their tray and get some airflow around those air cones. So that's what I've done. That wire thing was destined to go down on that shelf on the floor, but I've just worked round a few plants by moving things around. I don't need that area, so that area can just stay plantless for the time being. That's going to be a very cool spot in the winter down in that corner, so and possibly a damp spot, so not ideal. Anyway, that's how I'm getting round plants dripping on plants below. Okay, that's part 4 done. Hope you've enjoyed it. Again, a mix and match, big ones, small ones. One's falling apart, one's leaping out of the pot. All the differences. I'm trying to mix them up as best I can, and we'll see how we go. I'll see you in part 5, because I know there's going to be one. It might even be a 6 and a 7, but we're at least going to go that far. So see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.